Hey there. Tonight we're going back, way back, to a time when the pyramids still stood tall, but Egypt itself was falling apart. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Maybe lower the lights. Turn on a fan or let the quiet sounds of the night settle around you. And if you enjoy what we do here, stories that drift across time like sand on stone, you're welcome to subscribe. Only if it feels right. Now, close your eyes if you'd like, because you've just woken up in ancient Egypt, but not the golden age of pharaohs and treasure. No, this is the dark age, the one where the gods are quiet, the Nile runs thin, and even gold won't buy you bread. Welcome to the first intermediate period, where survival isn't just hard, it's unlikely. Let's begin. You awaken in a crumbling mud brick home, the morning sun peeking through cracks in the walls. The scent of dust and old straw hangs in the still air. A single breeze stirs the corner of the room where a bundle of dry reeds leans forgotten. Your mother hasn't stirred yet, and neither has the fire. The hearth is cold, its coals long, dead. The house feels hollow. Outside, the faint cries of a child echo down the narrow dirt street. A dog barks half-heartedly. But even sound seems tired now. It is the year 2180 BCE, though you wouldn't know how to say it. To you, it's just another morning. But something is different. The Nile, once so predictable and mighty, runs weak. This season, for the third year in a row, the floods have failed. Your father used to say the gods would never let Egypt go hungry. But he died last harvest, when the granary emptied too soon and too many mouths remained. Your village was once proud. Families worked the fields side by side. Priests led ceremonies in bright linen, and scribes came from Memphis to record taxes. Now the temple doors creak on their hinges, and the priest's voice has grown hoarse from empty prayers. The rituals go on, but the gods do not reply. There is talk among the elders of the pharaoh's death. Pepi II, who ruled longer than anyone could remember, has joined Osiris, but no one knows who rules now. There are whispers of power struggles in Memphis, of governors seizing cities, and of nomarchs turning temples into fortresses. You do not understand these things. You are only 11. You only know that the bread your mother used to bake is now made thinner, stretched with crushed beans and bitter herbs. You only know that the neighbors do not visit anymore, and your brother no longer smiles. As you step outside barefoot, the earth beneath you feels different, harder, drier. The neighbors' fields, once emerald and thick with wheat, are pale, with dust and struggling sprouts. A few farmers still plant, though their eyes carry shadows. Others have left entirely. At the edge of the village, the Nile glints in the distance, low and listless. Where it once roared with life, it now limps past like a wounded god. You remember your father's stories of crocodiles basking on the banks, of lotus blossoms blooming in the marshes. But today there are only cracked reeds and silence. A distant voice calls out. Someone asking for bread, someone else muttering about thieves on the southern road. There's an unease in every direction. No one says it aloud, but it's clear the kingdom is broken. Not just the walls or the roads, but the very order of things. And you have woken inside its dust. The hearth is cold this morning, and your mother hasn't sung in days. The mornings come quietly now, no sounds of chariots, no shouts from heralds or rustling scrolls carried by messengers from the capital. Just the soft creak of the shutters in the dry wind, and the brittle hush of a village learning to live without orders. There was a time, not long ago, when men in fine linen arrived on foot or on donkey, bearing the words of Pharaoh, letters sealed with wax and marked with the lotus emblem. They came with orders: plant the barley before the second moon, dig the canals by the rising flood, send offerings to the house of the sun, and always, always collect the grain. But that season has ended. It began slowly, like the Nile shrinking, without notice. First, the couriers came late, then not at all. No wax seals, no instructions. The temple priests kept burning incense in the old rhythms, but even they began to run out of oil. The headman's records curled with dust in the corners of his home. No one comes to check them anymore. Where once there were scrolls, there is silence. A silence that stretches across villages and fields like a linen shroud. You ask your uncle why the men from Memphis no longer visit. He doesn't answer. Just squints at the horizon and mutters something about the old king, Pepi. They say he reigned longer than any man should. So long that when he died, no one knew who was meant to follow. As if the kingdom had simply forgotten how to be ruled. Now it is the elders who whisper in corners. They speak of the days when Pharaoh's name was spoken before every meal, and his face painted on every temple wall. Now the only face they speak of is hunger. You remember the scribes, the men who measured the grain and scratched strange symbols on palm leaf and papyrus. Their reed pens moved fast like birds on water. But they're gone now too. No one knows when they left. One day, the doorway to the granary stood open, and their reed mats were empty. The ink dried in the sun. Without scribes, no one counts. The harvest. Without couriers, no one reads the stars to predict the floods. Without Pharaoh, who is there to keep Ma'at, the sacred balance, in place? And yet, the sun still rises. The women still bake bread, thin and stretched from smaller baskets of flour. The old man by the canal still repairs his net, though there are fewer fish than before. Life continues in its simplest, rawest form. There is a rhythm to this new silence. It is not as elegant as the old order, but it breathes. You look out over the fields, half planted, half abandoned, and see figures bent in labor. Neighbors, family, friends. No one directs them now. They dig because they must. They plant because it's all they know. You find yourself asking, if no one rules.
Is Egypt still here? But there's no one to answer. Not the priests, not the scribes, not the winds.
Only the slow drip of time, as certain as the Nile's memory. And still, the sun rises. It always rises, even on kingdoms that have fallen. The Nile has always been more than a river. It was your mother's song, the pulse of the earth, the soft breath that made the crops grow and the village smile. You remember her humming softly while rinsing linens at the water's edge. She'd pause, listening, not just to the ripples, but to the rhythm of something older. But that was before. Now the banks are brittle. They crumble beneath your sandals as you walk down, hoping, foolishly, to fill the clay jug. The Feskout surface is glassy and low, like someone forgot to breathe. Fish traps that once bulged with silver gleam now sit hollow. Wooden frames exposed to the sun like rib cages. Even the frogs are quiet. No one says famine. Not yet. Instead, the elders speak of unusual seasons and offer extra grain to the gods. You watched one of them kneel at the family shrine last night, forehead pressed to the dirt, whispering the old names with cracked lips. You didn't interrupt. You knew he wasn't praying for himself. The air feels wrong. It carries the scent
Of dust, not damp reeds. Boats that once needed poles now scrape the shallows.
Children play in what was once the deepest part, now ankle-deep and warm as blood. Your father tells you it's always been like this. Some years leaner than others, but he won't meet your eyes when he says it. You remember when he used to fish by moonlight, returning with baskets too heavy for one man to carry. Last night, he came back empty-handed and quiet. He didn't even scold your brother for letting the goats nibble the sycamore bark. The scribes from the capital haven't come in weeks. The tacksmen, once annoyingly punctual, have vanished too. Some say the court in Memphis has its own worries, rebellions, famines, or worse. But here in your village, the news flows slower than the Nile itself. You hear only what the wind carries, and still your mother keeps sweeping the doorstep every morning. She hangs the washing as if someone important might arrive. She stirs lentils into boiling water like it's a feast. Her rituals are small, stubborn acts of faith, but even she paused yesterday, just for a moment, and looked out at the drying river with furrowed brows. No one speaks it aloud, but the Nile is
Shrinking.
not just in width, but in spirit. The songs once sung at the water's edge now fade before they begin. Children no longer skip stones. The silence after the splash is too heavy. You stand at the riverbank now, squinting. The sun glints off the still surface, but there is no sparkle, no life. Only the faint sound of reeds rustling like a whisper that's forgotten its meaning. Maybe the gods are angry. Maybe they are grieving. Or maybe they've simply turned away. You squint across the still water, wondering if the gods have turned away. The shrine is smaller than you remember. A chipped idol of Osiris slumps beneath a reed canopy, half swallowed by dust. Years ago, your mother would sweep the altar clean each morning, placing a bowl of dates, a sliver of honeycomb, and a pinch of barley beside the statue's feet. Your father once whispered prayers as he lit the incense, voice low, eyes soft, with something like reverence. But that was before the rains forgot your village, before the priest stopped visiting, before the river stopped speaking in its old, generous voice. Now, the shrine is quiet. Not holy quiet. Not the kind that wraps you in warmth and meaning, but forgotten quiet. The clay bowls lie overturned. Jars once filled with oil or fruit are empty or shattered.
Lizard's nest where offerings once rested. Someone, no one says who, you took the bronze amulet from the god's neck last winter, and no one replaced it. Still you come. Not out of belief, not really, but because your hands remember. Because
Your body still follows patterns carved deep by the people who came before you. You sweep the floor with dry reeds. You fold your knees in the dust. You place a single crushed fig before the statue. Not fresh, but not entirely spoiled. And you light the incense stub you've been hoarding in cloth. Smoke rises, thin, slow. You speak, barely. Not because you think the god is listening, but because silence feels heavier when left unbroken. Osiris, you say, like it's a greeting, not a prayer. We're still here. There's no answer, just the whisper of wind against the cracked
mud walls. The shuffle of a chicken outside. A child coughing somewhere deeper in the house. Faith, once loud and fragrant with rituals, is now reduced to muscle memory, a habit of hope. Your younger brother once asked you, weeks ago, in the
heat of a sleepless night, do the gods even care anymore? You didn't answer. Because what could you say? That maybe they're waiting? That maybe this is a test? That gods sometimes go silent when they're angry? Or when they've been abandoned themselves? You didn't know which lie to choose. Instead, you told him to go to sleep. But tonight, you wonder again. As the incense burns, as the clay god's empty eyes stare forward without focus, you wonder if the divine ever really needed offerings, or if it was the people who needed something to offer. Your mother used to say, "We feed the gods so they remember us." But you think now, maybe feeding them was how we remembered ourselves. Even if no one replies, you'll come again tomorrow. Because forgetting is worse than silence, because the gods carved in clay might crumble, but the memory of them, of what they meant, lives in the ritual. Even if it's only you left to remember. The gods may be silent, but the wind still
moves through the reeds. You used to smell bread before you saw it.
Morning would arrive with the sound of grinding stones, the low hum of women humming to the rhythm, the heat of the clay oven waking up the yard. Flat loaves, puffed golden and warm, used to sit on reed trays like treasures. Bread was a sign the gods were near. Now the stones barely sing. The grind is slower, rougher. What little grain you thresh is brittle, light as husk, carried away by even the smallest breeze. You cover the basket with your shawl to keep the barley from vanishing into the air. Your hands are cracked from rubbing chaff, your nails rimmed with dirt that won't wash away. There is no oil left for your fingertips, just soreness and silence. Inside, your mother works. She no longer hums. She no longer smiles when she bakes. The flour she sifts is more dust than grain. You see her scoop a small bowl of clay, fine, grey, sifted carefully, and mix it into the dough. You don't ask questions. You just watch as she kneads it with a tired wrist, letting the dampness of grief and survival shape the loaf. The bread is small today. You count the cracks in its surface. You chew slowly, so slowly each bite a performance of fullness. The salt has been gone for weeks. The taste now is just ash and memory. Still you say nothing. Everyone at the table eats in silence, not out.
Of ritual, but because speaking takes strength. And no one wants to say the word famine aloud. Your little brother asks if there'll be honey tomorrow. Your mother does not answer. She rips her own piece in half and gives it to him. He doesn't.
Notice the gesture. He smiles.
And chews. You remember a feast once when your cousin got married and trays overflowed with figs and soft cheese. Your aunt wore flowers in her braids and your father danced. That night, the bread was sweet and hot, pulled from the fire with laughter still trapped inside. You'd never felt more full. You wonder if that was the last time you truly tasted anything. Now the gods receive no offerings. The temple jars are empty. Even the priests, once proud and robed in linen, look thin
around the eyes. The barley they once collected in taxes is gone. The granaries are locked or looted. You've heard whispers of fights over loaves, of ovens smashed in the night. Tonight, your mother leaves a crust near the shrine. Just a crust. She places it on a broken plate and murmurs something you can't hear. Maybe it's a prayer. Maybe it's an apology. You lie awake with your back to the wall, your stomach not quite empty, but not quite full. The taste of the clay still lingers in your mouth. You imagine the gods are hungry too. that they once knew what it meant to be fed, and have since forgotten the feeling. Hunger doesn't shout here, it just lingers, soft and permanent. You remember the day the coughing stopped, not because the silence brought peace, but because it felt heavier than the illness ever had. Your little brother, swaddled in what cloth remained, had grown quieter each night. No wails, no thrashing, just the thin rasp of breath that never deepened. In a house where grain was once measured by the basket, not by the pinch, your mother sat with him wrapped in her lap for hours. She didn't hum, she didn't pray. The gods had grown too distant for prayers. Her fingers just moved across his back again and again, as if trying to remind his lungs what they were meant to do. You asked once what they would name him. Your father looked up from a cracked bowl he was trying to mend. When he's strong enough to hold it, he said. But the name never came. Only the dry wind and the brittle coughs, and then nothing. The next morning, your father took the shovel. It was still caked with river clay from a season ago, the last time he thought it was worth digging anything. He walked past the field, past the garden that never grew, until he reached the fig tree. It hadn't borne fruit since the Nile thinned. Still its roots ran deep, deeper than hope, deeper than sorrow. He dug with short, hard motions, not because the earth was tough, but because his arms were. You watched from a distance, one hand on the dog's back, the other gripping your own wrist tightly. No one spoke, not even the birds. There was no linen to wrap him in, only your mother's old shawl, faded and soft, once dyed with saffron. She folded it around him without looking. Your older sister held your mother's shoulders. No tears came. Just the long, dry sound of her breathing through her teeth. When they placed him in the shallow earth, there was no priest to chant, no oil, no feather to weigh his soul, just your father's voice, dry, cracked, and strange. He said a name, one none
of you had ever heard before, a strong name, the kind meant for warriors or judges, the kind meant to last.
Then he placed the earth back in silence. Your mother left a small flatbread at the base of the fig tree. It wasn't for the gods. It wasn't even for your brother. It was for the memory of custom, for the feeling that something still tied you to what once was. Now, when you walk past that tree, you don't speak, but sometimes you leave a stone there, or a date, if you can find one. It doesn't feel like enough, but nothing ever does. You've begun to understand that some people are born too quietly to ever be remembered by history, but never by family. Sometimes in the dusk your mother hums again. Not the same songs. Slower ones. Ones that seem to have no words. You listen from your mat, eyes closed, hearing the lullabies meant for a boy who never had a name carved into clay. Some names are never spoken, but always remembered. You wake before the sun slipping out of the house quietly, so you don't wake your mother. She's been stretching her flower with powdered clay again, not because she wants to, but because she must. Your feet, dusty and cracked, follow a path you've walked 100 times before. Down the slope past the granary ruins, along the dry canal, and toward the market square. You used to love this journey. You used to hum. Your reed basket swings
lightly at your side, too lightly. It once carried figs, honey cakes, salted fish, fresh chickpeas.
Now it holds a broken comb, a cracked pendant, and a handful of dried lentils, not even enough to fill your palm. The square comes into view, and your heart sinks before your feet can even stop. There are only 4 stalls now. 5, if you count the old woman sitting cross-legged on a mat with wild onions in a bowl. She doesn't smile. No one does anymore. The potter's wheel once spun all day in the far corner, and children would run barefoot through rows of freshly baked clay. Now the wheel is silent, its wooden frame warped and sun-bleached. A child stands behind his mother, staring with hollow eyes at a trader's shriveled herbs. You wonder if he's hungry or just tired. Maybe both. You approach the stall with the goat milk, a thin-necked clay jar surrounded by flies and hope. You offer the broken comb. The trader, a man with sunken cheeks and a faded scar under his eye, looks at it, then at you. "Bone?" he asks. You nod. He picks up the jar, weighs it for a second, then places it into your basket. "A fair trade," someone mutters nearby. But you don't know if they're being sincere, sarcastic, or simply trying to remember what fairness even feels like. You step back, your stomach pulling at itself again. The clay jar is warm in your hand, not from freshness, but from sitting in the sun too long. You'll boil it before your mother drinks it. She always boils everything now, just in case you pass another trader, an old man with sandals patched with twine. He offers snails in a chipped bowl. You shake your head. He doesn't insist. No one bargains anymore. There's no energy for it, and even less for pride. The market used to sing. You remember that? Bronze scales clinking, traders shouting in 5 accents, children laughing as they snuck dates from distracted baskets. Your father once bought a goose here, and your brother spilled oil on his only tunic trying to carry it home. That stain never came out. Now silence is the currency, and everyone's rich in it. You tighten your grip on the basket and begin the walk home. Someone else's footsteps echo behind you, but no one says a word. Not because they're unfriendly, but because there's nothing left to say. The streets echo more now, not because they're louder, but because they're emptier. You remember the way his hand moved, steady, deliberate, as though the very act of writing summoned life from silence. The scribe would sit cross-legged beneath the shade of the temple's lintel, reed pen tucked behind his ear, surrounded by little pots of ink and the clean scent of papyrus. His voice was always low, almost melodic, as he murmured what he was, writing names, dates, requests to the gods. He'd once written your name. You still have the scrap, folded like a prayer, tucked inside a piece of worn linen. He said names had power, and to forget them was to lose part of yourself. That winter, he didn't come back. No explanation, no ceremony, just absence. The bench where he used to sit remains, half buried now under sand that creeps in like memory. Children still glance toward it when passing the old stone wall, as if expecting to see him hunched over his scrolls again. Without him, the scrolls began to curl. Papyrus left unattended warps in the heat. The temple's records, births, deaths, harvests, offerings, sit neglected. Flies land on them now. Dust blurs the careful ink strokes. Some of the newer scrolls are already flaking. Others have gone brittle like fallen leaves no one bothered to sweep. Your mother once said history only matters when someone writes it down. Now it seems no one is left to remember. Even the priests don't speak of the missing scribe, as if silence is easier to carry than grief. You tried once to pick up his pen. The reed felt awkward in your hand, its tip splintered from neglect. The ink, left uncovered, had dried into a crust at the bottom of the jar. Still you dipped the
pen in water and tried to trace the symbols he once taught you.
Your hand trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of trying to remember. Each curve and mark felt like reaching for something just out of sight. You wrote your name again. Crooked, unsure, but there. You whispered it as you finished, just as he once did. Sometimes you wonder where he went. Maybe he found another village with stronger temples and fuller granaries. Maybe he was taken by the fever that swept through the valley 2 winters ago. Or maybe, like so many others, he simply stopped believing that writing could change anything. Now, when the wind rattles the shutters of the shrine, it sounds almost like pages turning. You like to imagine it's him, reminding you, urging you not to forget. The temple remains, though its walls grow quieter. The gods no longer speak through ink, but in the hush between your thoughts, you still hear the scrape of his pen. And on some mornings, when the sun hits just right, you take out your scrap of linen. You trace the letters of your name slowly, reverently. Not because you're trying to become a scribe, but because you refuse to become forgotten. You try to remember what he taught you, though your fingers tremble when tracing hieroglyphs. You still remember the high wooden beams that held the grain baskets. As a child, you used to climb them with the others, racing to reach the sun's last orange light as it spilled across rooftops. Laughter echoed then. And beneath your feet, the granaries were full. Mounds of wheat and barley tucked beneath, woven lids, the pride of your village. The scent was earthy and sweet, like warm straw and promise. Now the doors creak in the wind, unlatched and half-broken. No one locks the granaries anymore. There's nothing to guard. The baskets have slumped, their frames softened by termites and time. Rats chatter beneath the thatch, emboldened by absence. And when you lift a broken pot, there's more sand. Than grain inside, even the scorpions have come, burrowing into what little remains. You sweep the floor slowly, not because it makes a difference. There is no one left to gather grain, and no grain left to store. But the movement of your hand, back and forth, gives rhythm to the day. Dust rises in sunlight shafts that filter through cracked walls. You cough, then continue. There is no overseer now, no scribe to count the stores, no boy with reed pen tracking bushels. The ledgers curled long ago, the ink dried. The records faded with the men who kept them. Your father once stood here with shoulders squared and voice deep, directing the workers. He had a way of making scarcity feel like order, always stretching, measuring, planning. You try to imitate his stance sometimes. You straighten your back, nod at nothing, and imagine yourself issuing commands to invisible workers. Then you return to sweeping. You find a stone jar wedged behind a beam. Its seal is broken, the clay lid dry and crumbling. Inside is a hardened clump of what might have once been flour mixed with grit and insect shells. You lift it carefully and place it near the entrance. Maybe the dogs will gnaw it. Maybe it's too old even for them. Across the room, a child's footprint has fossilized in spilled grain and sun-dried mud. You don't know whose it was. You stare at it longer than you mean to. Someone once ran here barefoot. Someone once giggled as they chased a chicken into the shadows of the granary. But that memory belongs to the air now, and the air forgets quickly. You glance outside. A gust of wind stirs the reeds. The sun is dropping again. You can't see the sunset from the granaries anymore. Too many trees have died, too many dune.
I have shifted, but you imagine it looks the same as it once did.
Somewhere, Beyond the silence, the sky still turns gold. You lean your broom against the wall and sit for a moment. The wood beneath you creaks but holds. You close your eyes and listen to the granary breathe, wood expanding, sand brushing stone, the faint scurry of paws. You don't know what will happen next, but for now, in this hollowed-out storehouse, you have the quiet and your hands and the memory of a time when the baskets were full. Even cracked vessels can hold memories. It is late afternoon in the village square where the sun falls low and long shadows stretch like tired limbs across the packed earth. The scent of smoke and ash drifts through the warm air. Someone is baking flatbread on an open fire. You're standing near the baker's stall, a worn wooden table tucked under a cloth canopy. A few baskets are spread across it. Onions with the papery skin still clinging, a bundle of green barley shoots, and 3 round loaves still steaming from the oven. That's all he has. And he knows it won't last till sunset. Then you see the stranger. He's not from here. His robe is newer, clean around the cuffs. His sandals are lined with a strip of leather, not bark. And wrapped around his wrist are 2 thick bangles of hammered gold. A necklace too peeks from beneath the collar. Not subtle, he approaches. The baker, with a slow, purposeful step. The way men walk when they've already made up their minds. Bread, he says simply. The baker doesn't look up at first. He's folding the edges of a reed basket. But then the man extends his hand, and the sunlight catches the edge of the bangle. A thin arc of golden light sweeps across the basket. I can trade, the man says. Gold from Memphis. The baker finally lifts his gaze and shrugs. Gold, he repeats, almost puzzled. Can gold feed my daughter? The man hesitates. He wasn't prepared for that question. You can see it in the way his shoulders tighten. I have no onions, the baker continues. No garlic? My cousin brought me these loaves this morning.
I give one to my wife, one to the elders. This last one, I was saving. The man shifts.
He tries again. I can give 2 rings, more later. There's more where this came from. But the baker only looks past him toward the sun. Then let the gold grow wheat, he says, because the fields won't. The silence stretches between them, heavy like a curtain dropped in a quiet room. No one says what both of them know, that once a single bracelet like that could have bought not just bread, but cattle, cloth, land, a field full of workers. But now a clean onion has more value than polished metal, because wealth only matters when the world agrees on what it means. And in times like these, when the Nile fails and hunger governs every breath, value reshapes itself. What fills the stomach becomes priceless. What glitters, useless. The man finally pulls his hand back. The bangles slip slightly, catching the sun one last time. You watch him walk away, still hungry, still adorned. He passes by a child, crouched in the dust, holding a single fig. The child doesn't even glance at him. Why would he? You realize that a shift has occurred, not just in politics or gods or kings, but in meaning itself. The old markers of power, titles, coins, gold, have no place in this new order. Here, sustenance rules. A clay pot filled with lentils carries more weight than 10 scrolls stamped with Pharaoh's seal. And quietly, you wonder, what will the next generation value? If they never see gold used, will they even recognize it? Or will they grow up believing that the greatest treasures are the simplest things? Bread, water, kindness. The sun glints off his bracelet as he walks away, still hungry. The sky above is too wide when the roof is broken. It feels like the stars are watching. Not kindly, not like they used to when your mother told stories beneath their light, but with the cold, distant gaze of things that have outlived everything. You and your father climb onto the roof at dawn. The old ladder creaks with each step. He doesn't ask for help. He simply looks at the bundle of straw and passes you the binding cord. That is how mornings begin now. Without words, without plans. Just the unspoken understanding of what must be done. The old roof gave up last week when the wind from the east pulled a section loose. It rained a little that night, more than you've seen in months. And still the floor was wet by morning. The smoke from the hearth refused to rise, curling instead around your ankles like a snake too tired to strike. Now your hands sting from tying reeds. The sharp edges bite into your skin, leaving small red lines that look like writing in a forgotten language. Your father doesn't look at your palms. He doesn't believe in softness, only in shelter. He works in silence, the
kind that speaks.
You've learned the rhythm of his breath, the way it hitches when the binding slips, the way his shoulders drop when a knot holds tight. You mimic him without thinking, twist, pull, knot, again and again. The village doesn't talk much anymore. Children still play, but their laughter is brief, like birds startled mid-song. The neighbors nod, but their greetings have grown smaller, like seeds with no soil to grow in. Even the goats bleat less. Sometimes silence is grief. Sometimes it's wisdom. Here it's survival. You glance over the edge and see your sister in the yard below, collecting chicken feathers to stuff the mattress. She doesn't look up. She moves slowly, like the air is heavier than it used to be. Every once in a while, a sound breaks through. The sharp cough of someone sick, the crack of dry firewood, the soft splash of water poured into clay. But mostly, it's the hush of people holding their breath. Midday sun blisters the thatch, and you pause to wipe your forehead. Your father doesn't stop. He's weaving faster now, the muscles in his forearms tight and knotted like rope. This isn't just a roof. It's protection from whatever waits beyond the fields. And, though no one says it aloud, you both know this. If the roof holds, maybe the house will too. Maybe the family will. There's a moment near sunset when you both finish tying the final corner. You look at each other, not for approval, not even for pride, just a glance long enough to mean it's done. You climb down. The ladder still creaks, your knees ache, your fingers throb, but the roof holds. Inside, the hearth glows again. Your sister has placed feathers in the bedding. Your mother stirs something over the fire. And your father sits beside the doorway, staring out into the night, not saying a word. But then no one needs to. At night, the wind hums gently against the new straw. You heard them before you saw them, not the thunder of chariots or the fanfare
of banners, boots scraping against dry earth, the hiss of steel drawn lazily from a sheath, and the bark of men who spoke like they owned the land.
They didn't wear the colors of any pharaoh, no gold sashes, no sacred scarabs pinned to their chests, just cracked leather belts, sunburned shoulders, and blades that looked recently stolen. They came from the west, their outlines shimmered in the morning heat. A dozen, maybe more. And when the first man pointed toward your uncle's cattle pen, no one moved to stop him. "We're collecting," he said. "Not an explanation, just a fact, like the sun rising, like grain spoiling. Your
Uncle stepped forward, not boldly, not foolishly, but as a man who had little left to lose. "This cow gives milk."
The children, the man raised a hand, not to strike, just enough to remind everyone there were more blades than pleas in this place. "For taxes," another soldier added. "Taxes, there is no pharaoh, no throne in Thebes or Memphis, no royal seal. Just warlords fighting over borders that shift like sand dunes. But still, someone always comes to collect. The cow is led away, rope tight against its neck. It stumbles once but doesn't resist. Animals, at least, seem to know when they are outnumbered. No one cries. No one begs. Your mother grabs your arm and pulls you behind the reed curtain of your home. You peek through the slats. One of the soldiers kicks over a jar of lentils. Another takes a drink from your neighbor's well, then spits it out. Children hide beneath their beds. Elders stare at the ground. And the men, the ones who once boasted about bravery over firelight, say nothing. Not out of fear, not entirely, but out of understanding, the kind of silence that comes from having watched this happen before. And before that, and again. You think of the stories your grandfather used to tell, of palace guards with plumed helmets, of priests who negotiated tributes with scrolls, not spears, of a time when power wore robes, not rags. Now power wears hunger, and it carries a blade. The soldiers take more than the cow. A woven mat from one house, a clay jar from another. A girl's hairpin, plucked without a word from her braid. But they don't kill anyone. Not today. That, you suppose, is mercy. When they leave, they don't look back. Dust swirls in their wake like ghosts, and for a moment the village stands still, as if the air itself has forgotten how to move. And then slowly, people begin to breathe again. Your uncle bends to pick up a wooden bowl, cracked from a soldier's careless boot. A dog barks from behind a hut. Your cousin curses softly as she gathers spilled grain. No one says much. There's nothing new to say. Just another day in a kingdom that no longer remembers its crown. After they leave, the village exhales, like it had been holding its breath for a generation. The night is the only time the house feels alive. During the day, the silence is heavy, broken only by the groan of dry wood or the scrape of an empty bowl. But when the stars appear and the air cools, your grandmother stirs. She leans close to the fire, her shawl wrapped tightly around her thin shoulders, and her voice returns like the Nile after drought, slow, winding, and full of forgotten things. She doesn't ask if you want a story, she just begins. She tells you of gods who walked among men, of Osiris carved in jade, and Isis, who wept for love so fiercely that the river rose in sympathy, of pyramids that scraped the moon, and kings who ruled for 100 years. She speaks of battles with creatures made of smoke and of a time when the stars obeyed human voices. You've never seen a pyramid. You've never even left the village. But you close your eyes and let the shapes of her words take form behind your
lids. You imagine sandstone steps, golden light, and guards with spears that shine like the sun.
She tells you the gods once lived close, that a boy could walk to the edge of the world and find their footprints in the sand. She laughs when she speaks of the old days. Her voice creaks like the firewood, but it is warm. Warmer than your blanket warmer than your mother's cooking. Sometimes her eyes close as she speaks, as if remembering too hard makes the images real again. You wonder if she believes her stories, or if she's just keeping them alive for your sake. There are others in the circle. Your little brother leans into her side, his eyes wide. Your uncle, silent all day, finally speaks, just to correct a detail. It wasn't Sekhmet who burned the fields, he says. It was Ra's fire eye. Your grandmother smiles. You weren't there, boy. The laughter that follows is the only joy in the house all week. The fire crackles like applause. Outside, the wind hums against the clay walls. You wrap your arms around your knees, pulling yourself closer to the flame and to the past. Your grandmother says the old gods don't visit anymore because no one remembers their names. But she remembers. She carries them like old songs, each word a seed kept safe through hard seasons. You look at her hands, the same ones that once harvested wheat, that buried her husband, that raised your mother, that now tremble only when the stories stop. Her voice may fade one day, but not tonight. Tonight it burns brighter than the fire. Your father rarely joins in. He listens from the shadows, his arms crossed, face unreadable. But once, you saw him wipe his eyes when she told the story of the god who walked through the underworld just to find his child. You didn't say anything. You know these stories won't feed you. They won't fix the roof or bring the Nile back to fullness, but they stitch something together inside you. They remind you that before the hunger, before the silence, there were words, and those words had power. When the fire dies down, no one moves. You all just sit there, warming yourselves in the memory of things that may never have been, but feel more real than anything the day brings. The flames crackle like distant drums, like old songs trying to return. They say he was crowned in Thebes, wrapped in linen dyed with rare lapis, his brow kissed by the uraeus and the sun. You remember hearing it from a merchant once, passing through with cracked sandals and eyes like river stone. "A boy king," he said, with a voice like thunder and eyes sharp as Horus. That was 3 flood seasons ago. The river barely swelled that year. It hasn't since. You've never seen a royal procession. You've never touched a coin with his image. There are no new temples, no carved decrees, no fresh scrolls read aloud at the village square. The scribes left long ago. The priests followed. Even the statue of Osiris in the village shrine has started to crumble, the gold leaf flaking like old scabs. Your father still calls him Nesubit, the living Horus. But there's a tiredness in his tone, like a man reciting a spell that no longer works. He watches, he tells your youngest sister, as he traces the shape of the pharaoh's cartouche into the dust. But the wind scatters it before the lines are complete. No one speaks of protection anymore. There are no chariots on the roads. The granaries have no guards because there's nothing left to guard. Once during a dust storm you imagined the pharaoh arriving, his canopy shading him, his lion hunters ahead, his sandals unstained by soil. You watched the horizon until your eyes ached. Nothing came. The baker's daughter used to say she dreamt of him, that he had wings, and when he flew overhead, the barley bloomed again. She hasn't spoken of that dream in months. The bakery closed when the last grain sack split open, and her father took to carving boats instead. Tiny ones that can't float. Still sometimes, late at night, You climb the roof of your crumbling home and lie on the cool clay. You watch the stars. The old priest once taught you that the pharaoh speaks to the gods through them, or perhaps the gods speak to him. You don't really believe that, but you whisper his name anyway. Not loudly, not angrily, just gently. A name that's supposed to carry thunder now sounds more like a question. Maybe he is just a boy. Maybe he never wanted the crown. Maybe no one ever told him what to do with it. Or maybe he's dead and no one dares say it. Your world hasn't ended, it's just slowed, faded. And in the fading, the title of Pharaoh means what a flood means. When it doesn't come, something that used to matter, something that once saved you, a boy king, a missing god, a whisper to the sky. That's all he is to you now. And yet, on the coldest nights, when the reeds don't rustle and even the jackals fall silent, you whisper his name again. Not because you believe he'll come, but because someone should remember he was meant.
2. You try whispering his name to the stars anyway, just in case he hears. You duck beneath the cracked lintel of the potter's hut, pushing aside a reed curtain that barely hangs on.
The air inside is heavier than you remember, filled with the memory of fire long gone out. The faint scent of ash still lingers, clinging to the earthen walls, soaked into the clay-stained floor. Dust motes spin slowly through the streaks of light coming in from the slatted roof, as if time itself has slowed inside this forgotten space. The wheel sits in the center, silent, unmoving. Once it turned from sunrise to dusk, spun by calloused feet and careful hands. The potter used to sing while he worked, soft, tuneless humming that threaded through the air like smoke. You never knew the words, but the sound made the hut feel alive. Now there is only silence, broken by the soft creak of old wood as you step further in. You pause beside the kiln, its wide mouth gaping like an extinguished sun. The soot is still, caked around the opening, thick and brittle. Inside, a few blackened shards remain, a cracked bowl, a deformed lamp, things that didn't survive the fire. You wonder if he left them there or simply never came back to finish the batch. Low shelf near the wall, you spot a half-finished jar. One side smooth and curved, the other lumpy, like the potter's hand hesitated and never returned. You lift it with care. The clay is dry now, but not fired. If you held it too tightly, it might crumble in your hands. You sit down on the ground, cross-legged where he used to. For a moment, you imagine the wheel turning again, your foot pressing down, your hands steady and firm. You dip your fingers in the water bowl beside you, shape the clay like he taught you once. Steady pressure, light touch. He used to say pots were like people. Too rough and they collapse, too soft and they drift apart. But the water bowl is dry. It hasn't seen use in seasons. You set the jar down gently on the windowsill, where sunlight falls in long, slow lines. The shelves above you are still filled with his work. Jars with painted necks, bowls the color of sand, cups with thumbprints still visible if you tilt them just right. He made enough for the village once, traded them for figs, eggs, sometimes even silver. His hands shaped the things that held everyone's daily life. You remember the last time you saw him, carrying a wrapped bundle toward the road, not looking back. He'd stopped taking orders long before that. Said the clay had started to resist him, like it no longer wanted to become anything at all. You glance down at your own hands. Still dry, still capable, but unsure. Like the wheel, Outside, a wind stirs, pushing dry leaves through the open doorway. They scatter at your feet, whispering across the floor. You rise slowly and brush your fingers along the edge of the unfinished jar one last time. You think about taking it with you, but you don't. Some things are meant to stay where they were left. You leave it on the windowsill unfinished, like most things now. You wake early, as always, before the sun lifts the haze off the fields. The dust settles differently at this hour, less like dirt, more like memory. You pass the cracked courtyard and head toward the tree. The fig tree. It still stands, though thinner now. Its branches twist like tired fingers, and its leaves hang curled, more ash than green. But you still check it every day. It's a ritual you don't remember starting. Only that you've never stopped. As a child, that tree was your world. You climbed it barefoot, scraped knees swinging above the roots. You once dozed in its shade with a half-eaten fig in one hand and your brother's laughter drifting on the breeze. It was where your mother called you home from, her voice full of warmth and flower dust. In those days, the figs were heavy with sugar. Purple, warm from the sun, their skins would split and drip syrup down your wrist. Bees came in thick clusters, clumsy with sweetness, and you chased them with wild delight. Now, the bees are gone. The fruit is still there, small, stunted, clenched tight against the branch. They never ripen. You've waited. You've waited through floods that never came, rains that barely kissed the soil, and long, trembling silences between harvests. But still, the figs remain bitter. Your father says the soil has changed. Your aunt swears it's the gods, angered by broken temples and forgotten offerings. But you don't believe in curses, not really. You believe in the ground beneath your feet, in sun and seed, in sweat, in time. So you water it, not every day, there isn't enough, but when you can, you gather the cloudy runoff from the washing basin, pour it slow at the base like an apology. The roots still take it in. You think they remember you. Some days you speak to the tree. You tell it about the neighbor's daughter who's leaving. For the coast, about how the old well caved in last week, about how your brother still hasn't come home, though the fighting ended moons ago. You say all this quietly, like you're confiding in someone who once understood. You never expect
Answers. Last season you found a single fig split open on the ground, overripe, its center crawling with ants.
It felt like a miracle. You didn't eat it, just held it in your hands a while, watching the ants come and go. Then you buried it. Not because you were afraid, but because it felt sacred. Now each time you pass the tree, you look not for fruit, but for change. The curl of a leaf, the stretch of a new branch, the silence of stillness. Because sometimes what doesn't grow still teaches you how to wait. And so the tree waits. You wait. The whole village seems to wait, not for gods, but for signs, for seasons that remember how to turn. The figs have not sweetened. But the tree still stands, and so do you. You still believe, not in gods, but in seasons. He arrived, just past midday, when the light was harsh and the air sat heavy on the village walls. A dark figure at first, moving steadily through the shimmer of heat. You watched from beneath the awning, your hand pausing in its work. The stranger's sandals were firm and uncracked, stepping cleanly over dust and dung. His robe was not patched or faded, but bright, dyed with something your village hadn't seen in many seasons. He greeted you in Egyptian, but his accent danced differently.
Nubian, maybe. His skin gleamed with sweat, but he walked like someone who knew exactly where he was going, even if the road curved. You stood, brushing flour from your knees, and met him halfway. He asked for water. Not with urgency, but with trust, like he expected you to have some.
You handed him your gourd, the one you'd tucked away beneath the cool stone near the steps. He drank slowly, gratefully. Then, to your surprise, he smiled. "They're rebuilding in the south," he said, voice like river clay, low and smooth. "Order is coming back. Temples have scribes again. The taxes are fairer. Roads are safer." You nodded politely. That kind of news always comes from travelers. Words smooth with distance, untouched by the hunger of here. He looked around. "These houses will fill again," he said, half to himself. "You'll see." You didn't answer, but you watched him, the way he stood tall, the ease with which he adjusted the pack across his back. He carried scrolls, sealed ones. Someone was still writing letters somewhere. Someone still believed in records and roads. You offered him dried figs. He declined. But you handed them over anyway, wrapped in an old linen strip from your brother's tunic. He smiled again and pressed his hand to his chest. "I'll remember this," he said. Then he walked on. You stood by the doorway long after he vanished into the light. The breeze had picked up, but not enough to cool. You could still see his prints in the dust, sharp and even. You imagined following them, leaving behind the cracked jars, the quiet, the sweeping. What if the temples truly did echo with chants again? What if children were laughing by the riverbanks in the south? What if grain weighed heavy on new scales? You took a step forward, then another, then stopped. The ground felt different beneath your soles, lighter somehow, as if it might let you go. But when you looked behind you, your own prints curved back into the same doorway you'd stood in that morning. The same one your father stood in, and his father before him. Your footprints are known here. They're part of the dust now, worn in, familiar. If you left, who would tend the last altar? Who would know where the well-stone wobbles? Who would sweep the granary, not for grain, but for memory? You turned, walked back inside, and dipped your hands in the basin. The water was warm and a little sour. Still you drank it, because it was yours. The stranger's voice lingers, though. Rebuilding, roads, temples. It all sounds far, but not impossible. Maybe not today, but someday. You glance south, toward the hills. A ribbon of dust rises faintly in the distance. He's still walking. Somewhere, his sandals meet stone, not sand. Somewhere, another village watches him pass, and wonders too. But the ground here knows your footprints too well. You meet her where the reeds are thickest, just beyond the bend in the Nile where the current slows. She carries water in a wide clay jar, balanced with perfect grace against her hip. Her eyes do not avoid yours, but they do not linger either. She is from upriver, a village smaller than yours, if that's even possible now. The drought has drawn the people closer to what little water still moves. There is no courtship, no songs, just time and silence. And work shared in the fields where lentils grow, thin and uncertain. You begin to walk back with her each evening. She never complains, she never asks, but she always leaves a few lentils aside from her own meal, sets them on a leaf, and slides it toward you. One day, without discussion, you walk to the river together and stand beneath a fig tree that no longer fruits. 2 elders from your village stand nearby, not priests, just old men with quiet voices. There is no dowry, there is no contract, no feast, no musicians, just her hands in yours, dusty but steady, and the stillness of a world too tired for celebration. One of the elders mumbles a phrase about union and patience. You repeat it. She does too, that is all. She places a bowl of lentils between you and you eat. That night, she follows you back to your hut. The mat is shared now. The fire burns a little longer. You speak only once. You ask her name again. She says it quietly, and then sleep takes you both, side by side for the first time, your breaths falling into rhythm. In the days that follow, she weaves a new mat. She arranges stones outside the door. She hums when she pounds grain. Her voice is not musical, but it fills the hut in a way silence never could. You begin to plant differently, slower, steadier. When the wind howls, she stays seated. When the rain does not come, she does not curse the sky. She simply sharpens the sickle as if that were prayer enough. She does not dream aloud of wealth or sons or blessings from forgotten gods. But once, as you watch her sleep, you notice the lines in her face soften. She smiles slightly, even in sleep, as if dreaming of something real. She has not brought gold or linen or status, but she has brought presence, and in this crumbling world, in this Egypt of empty granaries, unmarked graves, and gods grown silent, that is something solid. You find yourself waking earlier, not because the birds call, but because she's there. Not a ceremony, not a miracle, just a marriage of quiet eyes. 2 people, still choosing to meet each other in the morning. That night, the stars seem closer. It happens just before dawn, when the stars are still visible, and the village lies wrapped in its hush. The clay walls of your home are cold, the fire long faded, but your hands are warm from holding hers. She arrived quickly, quietly at first. Then, a cry, not a whimper, not a gasp. A full-bodied, lungs-filled, sky-rattling cry that echoes across the courtyard and bounces off the old plaster of the temple wall. It doesn't sound like something small, it sounds like something determined. Someone unwilling to enter the world without being noticed. The midwife exhales, the neighbors stir. One woman peeks through her doorway, then smiles. She'll be
Strong, the midwife whispers. The gods favor children who arrive with thunder. Your wife is exhausted, pale, but alive.
Her eyes flicker open and lock on the small bundle you're now wrapping in the finest linen you could find, saved from the old days when your mother wove cloth for the overseer's wife. It still smells faintly of sandalwood and storeroom dust. You tighten the wrap gently, tucking in her tiny hands. She fusses, then settles. Her face is still red, but her breathing evens. The noise fades, leaving a strange quiet in its place, not the brittle silence of hunger or grief, but a warm one filled with presence. In the corner, an old clay jug catches the light from your oil lamp. You had filled it days ago, just in case the Nile blessed you with this chance. You dip a cloth and dab your daughter's forehead. She shudders and lets out another small, defiant wail, a healthy child, born in a sick land. You can't stop staring at her, the curve of her ear, the tiny fold of skin at her wrist. She feels both familiar and new, like a forgotten story told again, with different words. Outside, the chickens rustle. A dog barks once and goes quiet. And slowly, one by one, the neighbors begin to come closer. Not to intrude, but just to listen. One sits by your doorway with a handful of herbs. Another brings a few figs. A third leaves a reed toy by the threshold, without saying a word. The village hasn't heard a newborn's cry in weeks, maybe months. And somehow, that single voice, untrained, hungry, alive, feels louder than any decree from a king or nomarch. It is not just a cry, it's a signal that life continues, that some things, tiny, wriggling, red-faced things, still arrive, despite famine, despite raids, despite temples grown quieter and gods gone still. Your wife falls asleep, her hand resting on your arm. The child breathes in tiny gusts, snuffling against the linen. You lean against the wall and close your eyes just for a moment. In your mind, you picture the Nile, not the dry, cracked riverbed you saw last week, but the Nile from old stories, full and strong, carrying silt and stories, cradling boats, feeding fields. You wonder if your daughter will ever see it that way. Will she run in tall barley, hear hymns in a crowded temple again? Or will she grow up knowing only the sounds of this age, cautious footsteps, whispered plans, and empty granaries? You don't know. No one does. But this morning, in the hush after her cry, the air feels different, lighter, braver. And though the sky is still dry, something inside you begins to thaw. One morning, without fanfare or drumbeat, the Nile creeps back. It isn't the grand flood your grandparents once described. No roaring surge, no sweeping away of dust-choked memories. Just a whisper of motion, a slow, silvery reach across the cracked banks, enough to fill the shallowest hollows, to stain the earth darker than despair. You notice it before anyone else. The scent hits first. Not the dryness of sun-baked clay or the sour tang of empty fish traps, but something different. Wet, loamy, like breath drawn deep into ancient lungs. You stop in your tracks, inhale, and close your eyes. When you open, them green is peeking through brown. Reeds. Small, spindly, but unmistakable. Like thin fingers pressing up from beneath the soil, trying to remember the feel of light. Your feet are bare as you step down the bank. The ground, once cracked like broken pottery, now clings to your toes with cool insistence. The silt is thick and yielding and real. For the first time in what feels like centuries, it doesn't crumble beneath your weight. Behind you, your daughter giggles. She's never seen the river move before. To her, the Nile was a story, something you spoke of in sighs and past tense. But now it stretches before her, alive and glinting. She runs ahead, skirts hitched up, leaving tiny prints in the mud. Her laughter rings out, bouncing off the reeds and slipping into the current like an offering. Others join you slowly, a neighbor with a bent back, a boy with a fishing spear that's seen too many dry seasons. Your sister, arms folded, staring, like it might vanish if she blinks. No one speaks, but they all step forward. The water doesn't roar. It murmurs like a grandparent telling a half-forgotten tale, voice softened by time. The reeds sway to the rhythm. Just a little. Just enough. You crouch near the edge. Let the muddy water run between your fingers. It isn't clear, it isn't clean, but it's here. And the earth. The earth smells alive again. A heron passes overhead, wings stretched like woven linen. You glance up and feel something tighten in your chest. Hope? Maybe. or maybe just the weight of relief, of not being afraid of tomorrow for once. Your father comes later, leaning heavily on his staff. He doesn't speak either, just sits on the bank, eyes fixed on the place where the water laps gently at the reeds. You remember when his voice filled the night with songs. Maybe he's remembering too. Your daughter finds a snail shell and holds it up like treasure. You nod, smiling, and she races away again, chasing ripples. The Nile hasn't flooded. The grain won't be plentiful this year. But it moved, it came back, it remembered. And that's enough for now. You dig your fingers into the silt and feel it cling. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a drum. Hesitant, testing. Maybe someone dares to believe again. You sit down, let your feet soak. The sun is warm. The wind tastes different. The silence that once haunted the village now hums with breath. Not a miracle, but a beginning. The river hasn't healed, but it has remembered. He arrives just after midday, when the shadows of the date palms stretch long across the courtyard, and the village lies still in the weight of the heat. He walks with a limp, dust caked thick on his sandals, and lips cracked from silence or too much wind. You spot him first, a narrow figure emerging along the old path from the riverbank. The same road that used to bring scribes and merchants back when people still believed maps mattered. Now it brings wanderers. And this one carries nothing but a satchel of dry parchment and a voice thick with something you haven't heard in years, certainty. "I bring news," he says. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the nearby goat to pause in its chewing. You motion him toward the shade of your wall where a patch of cool ground remains untouched by sun. You fetch him a clay bowl of water which he drinks with both hands like someone who still remembers the taste of kindness. Then he speaks. "There is a king again," he says. "Two lands are speaking the same tongue. Temples in the south are being swept clean. The granaries near Abydos are being refilled with barley and lentils. Boats filled with wheat have begun floating north." You glance at your mother. She is stirring a pot of watered stew, pretending not to listen. But her hands have stopped moving. You ask him, "How do you know?" "I saw the flags," he replies. "Not painted by villagers we sewn in the palace. I saw men with arm rings again, priests walking barefoot into temples they once fled. I saw a boy crowned beneath the sycamores." You want to believe him, but you've lived through too many false dawns, too many men with blades claiming to be saviors, too many gods who were silent while villages burned. So you offer him no praise, just shade. And a few dates, pulled from the tree that, after 3 years of bare branches, finally bloomed again this spring. He bites into one and closes his eyes. Not out of hunger, but memory. You ask, "What's his name, this king?" "Mentuhotep," he says softly. "Of Thebes." Thebes. You remember that name from your father's stories? A city of stone and banners, of lotus gardens and painted pillars, a place that once meant order. Your brother leans in. "Will he come here?" The man doesn't answer right away. "He will come," he says eventually, "if we make ourselves ready. If the river rises, if the gods permit, it is not a promise, but neither is it an empty fable." That night, the village sits up longer than usual. The fire crackles louder. Old stories are retold with fresh color. Someone dares to laugh, and you find yourself listening for drums, not because you expect them, but because, for the first time in seasons, the silence no longer feels permanent. You still don't quite believe, not yet, but tomorrow you'll sweep the shrine. Just in case. Hope doesn't arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it just asks for water. At the edge of the village, where the wind scatters dust across broken stone, a boy sits cross-legged on a mat of reeds. The sun leans low behind him, casting long shadows across the courtyard. In his lap, a strip of papyrus, worn but still blank. In his hand, a reed pen freshly cut. And beside him, a chipped jar of ink, black as the Nile in flood. The boy is no priest. He is no royal, just the grandson of a weaver and the son of a laborer who vanished 2 harvests ago. But today he is a scribe. His first student is younger, his cousin maybe. The girl leans forward, watching the way his fingers move. His strokes are awkward. His symbols wobble, lean too far, or sit too close together. But he does not stop. He writes the same word again and again. The name of their village, each letter more confident than the last. He believes, quietly, fiercely, that writing it enough will keep it real. The name means nothing to outsiders, but to them, it holds everything. The cracked well in the center square, the smell of lentils at noon, the broken statue that watches over the oldest house. It is the sound of their mother's laugh and the silence after their father's goodbye. He reads the name aloud like a prayer. More children arrive. Some barefoot, some clutching, broken baskets or bits of honeycomb. None have ever held a scroll before, but they gather, circle around him, drawn not by authority, but by the gravity of something new. His voice is soft but certain. "This," he says, tapping the scroll, "is who we are." The wind lifts a corner of the papyrus. He places a small stone on it. He teaches them how to hold the reed, not tight, just enough to guide it. They copy him, clumsily. Letters turn backward. Dots go missing. Ink spills. But no one laughs.
There's no space for pride here, only learning. He doesn't just teach letters. He teaches remembering. Write your grandmother's name, he says. Write the name of the man who sells melons. Write the word for bread, for water. Write
Them as if they'll be needed tomorrow, because maybe they will. An old woman passes by and pauses, shading her eyes. She sees the boy, the scroll, the circle of children. She nods once. A slow nod, not of approval, but recognition. She disappears, then returns with a small, wrapped bundle, a faded scroll. She sets it beside him without a word. Inside, the name of her husband, a poem, a map drawn by memory. He copies it onto a fresh strip, careful not to smudge. His hand steadier now, for the first time in years, the village begins to record itself again. Not for pharaohs, not for temples, but for itself. For the people who refuse to vanish. For the names they whisper at night before sleep. The scrolls are stored in a clay pot near the well. They smell of dust and ink and something older. Hope, maybe. Or defiance. And the boy, not much older than 10, wakes every morning before the sun, dips his reed in ink, and writes the village's name one more time. Because to write it is to speak it, and to speak it is to keep it alive. Ink returns to papyrus, like veins filling with blood again. It begins not with fire, but with silence. A silence broken by the sound of hands in mud. Yours, your neighbors, your uncles. Wrinkled fingers and children's palms pressing together, straw and clay beneath the sun. No decree started it. No priest blessed it. Only a grandmother's voice saying we should fix the oven, and no one disagreed. The old oven had collapsed seasons ago, and during the year of the second drought, when even the date palms wept sap instead of fruit. Since then, families had cooked what little they had on open stones or over scraps of dried papyrus, the smoke sharp and thin. Bread became rare, and when it came, it was flat, brittle, and hurried. Forgotten were the days when loaves rose and even cracked with golden heat. Now you kneel beside your cousin, shaping the dome. Someone hums. The mud sticks under your nails. Straw dust clings to your arms. But no one complains. Even the children help, carrying water in chipped pots, pouring it carefully like it matters. Because it does. By the third day, the base is dry, and a young woman paints a tiny ibis on the side with leftover ash. For luck, she says. No one laughs. Instead, someone offers a bowl of soaked lentils for her to eat. It's the first time you've seen someone give food without asking for anything back. When the fire is lit, the air changes. The crackle of kindling isn't just noise, it's memory. Old men wipe their eyes without reason. Women bring jars of barley flour they've hoarded for months, perhaps years. A child brings a pinch of salt she found buried in a pouch, and it's passed around like treasure. You knead with your mother, pressing the dough into the shape she taught you when you were small. She works in silence, but her hands remember. And when the first loaf is placed inside, the entire village gathers around the mouth of the oven like it's a shrine. The smell is what does it. It rises from the clay mouth and weaves through the air like incense. It smells like the Egypt you remember. Not the empire or the pharaohs, but your Egypt. Harvest mornings and festival songs, the way your father once laughed when bread came out too puffed. Even the dogs sit still. When the loaf is pulled free, cracked, steaming, golden at the edges, no one moves. Then someone tears a piece, dips it in oil, and offers it to an elder. She chews slowly, eyes closed. This, she says, is what we forgot. And then the sharing begins. Loaves bake and vanish in minutes. People laugh with mouths full. Children play in the flour dust. Someone starts singing a song you haven't heard since your brother's wedding. You didn't know you remembered the words, but you do. By nightfall, the stars rise over a village that feels less broken. The oven stands at its center, warm, smoky, alive. Not sacred, but something close. And as you sit with your back against its side, chewing bread that tastes like memory and hope kneaded into one, you realize something. This wasn't just about food. It was about believing you could still build something. Together. For the first time in years, people eat together and smile with their mouths full. Your hair is grayer now, silver threads woven by time and drought and memory. You walk slower, but the path is familiar. Worn by your bare feet, your mother's feet, your grandfather's feet before that. The houses are lower now, patched with new mud and old hopes. Children still chase each other through courtyards, though their laughter sounds smaller than it once did. The temple is gone, the priest never returned, but someone still sweeps its steps every morning, not for ceremony, not for praise, just because it's what's always been done. The village still stands. Not because it was spared, but because it was stubborn. Because you rebuilt every wall the wind took. Because even when the grain ran out and the scribe stopped sending word from the capital, someone lit a fire. Someone cooked lentils. Someone whispered prayers over the sick. There's no statue with your name on it. No scribe will carve your story into limestone. But your life is etched in softer places, in the hands you held, the baskets you mended, the clay jars you shaped, when the potter's wheel fell silent. The Nile hums, quiet but steady. Its banks are narrower now, the water slower, but it still moves, a silver ribbon tying your childhood to your old age. You remember when it was wild and full, flooding with promise. You remember when it nearly disappeared. You remember carrying your son to its edge and teaching him to
skim stones. You sit in the shade of a fig tree that has never fruited. Still it grows. Still it reaches, like all of you did. Egypt was never just pyramids and gold. It was the woman who taught you to bake bread over an open flame. It was the
boy who shared his last date during a famine. It was the man who carried a broken loom through a sandstorm so his family would have clothes next winter. It was you and them, all of you, quietly surviving, quietly remembering, holding on to rituals when there were no priests, holding on to each other when there was no king. You think of the gods, the quiet ones, the ones made of clay and smoke and hope. Maybe they never left. Maybe they just learned to whisper. Your grandson brings you a piece of dried pomegranate, soft from the sun. He doesn't ask questions about the old days. He listens when you're ready to speak. He knows silence is not emptiness. It's a kind of memory. You pass by the reed basket hanging near your door, patched a dozen times, still useful. You run your fingers along its rim. Every strand was placed by someone who endured. That's all a kingdom really is. Not conquest, not temples, endurance. As dusk settles, the wind moves gently through the courtyard. Someone nearby lights a lamp. The flame catches, flickers, and then steadies. You watch its glow stretch along the wall, warm and quiet. You lie down on your mat, bones aching but spirit light. You've lived without monuments, but not without meaning. And as you lie down tonight, you know, even in the dark ages, light never fully left.